Well, hello everybody, and welcome to CARMA's first AMEC Measurement Month event of 2021. I'm just here to do some very quick housekeeping, just to let you know that this event will be recorded. It will be available afterwards on demand. We've got some fantastic panelists with us today, so I won't take any more of your time. I'll hand straight over to our host, Jennifer Sanchez. Jennifer, over to you.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Jack. Many thanks for the quick intro. So we'll just get started in a few more minutes. We're just waiting for everyone to join in. We had quite a few registrations today. So in the meantime, let's quickly cover some housekeeping rules. So we have about an hour on the agenda today to cover quite a wide range of topics. So you will also find a little chat box. So if you want to introduce yourself, let us know where you're based, where you're logging in from today. Let us know where you are in terms of your measurement program. So give us a shout in the chat box. We'll also leave some time at the end for questions, about 10-15 minutes or so. So if you have a burning question that you'd like to ask our panelists, make sure that you use the chat box at the end to ask your question. So it's 5 past, so I think with that we should probably begin the webinar. So today I am absolutely delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel of experts, and I'll do a quick round of intro if you guys want to turn your cameras on now. So first of all, I will be joined by Ayeni Adekunle. Ayeni is the founder and CEO of Blackhouse Media. He is a Nigerian entrepreneur, writer, and author. His company, Blackhouse Media, works with various different brands globally in media, PR, digital commerce, marketing, information, technology, and research. Ayeni, it's great to have you on the panel today. Next, on the panel, Nick Pearson. Nick is the head of European PR and comms at Honda Europe. He brings years of experience in PR and comms. And I am going to quote him here. He has a bit of a soft spot for measurement and insights. And it's a bit of an understatement to say this. He has also worked with numerous organizations in the past to help them deliver the right message in an authentic way. So great to have you with us, Nick, today. Next on the panel, Elise Mies. Elise is the Global Communications Measurement Manager at Philip Morris International. So her job is all about turning data into insights. She has also a wealth of experience in this field. She has worked for a variety of global organizations for over 17 years. Even more, 17 years. So Elise, great to have you on the panel today. And last but not least, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Ola Graham. Ola is an account director at CARMA. She brings 13 years of experience in media analysis and insights. She's also an active member of the AMEC not-for-profit group and the Young Leaders group as well. So thanks for joining. And I think in summary, we can say that we have years and years of experience in the room, in the virtual room, I should say, which is fantastic because today we'll talk about a topic that we're all very passionate about, which is the culture of measurement. So how do we embed a culture of measurement, be it for an organization that we work for or for a client that we work with? How do we go from simply counting stuff and counting the stuff that's easy to count and make us look good to actually report on more meaningful metrics that will then help us create a more meaningful and insightful measurement program to create a culture of learning. So yeah, we'll discuss about these topics today because ultimately what cannot be measured cannot be improved. So I will turn to our fantastic panel today who will share their unique experience, share some top tips, help us answer some questions to help us with that. So I'd like to start really from the beginning. Where do you start with your measurement and evaluation? It's often something that we do after a campaign or after a product launch. it's seen as a post-activity thing, but where do you actually start? And Nick, I'd like to start off with you, if that's okay. Honda has gone through quite a lot of transformational change, to say the least, recently in terms of how it evaluates the effectiveness of its PR and comms. So how did Honda decide to stop simply counting stuff to adopt a more objective-driven approach?
I'll come off mute now. Sorry about that. So we've had measurement programs for many years, like most companies of our size. But I think what really precipitated the change was we can, of course, present to senior management our counts of stuff, as you call it, the number of articles, the kind of the output, shall we say. But what we wanted to do was really understand, okay, well, if we change our input, how does that really affect ultimately what happens to the customer? How can we improve the effectiveness of what we do to really have a strong impact on the customer? So we wanted to move beyond the traditional media coverage statistics and start to really understand, well, what is our impact on website traffic, share of search, and ultimately moving into that customer interest and customer engagement and compelling the customer to do something. So that's why we felt that we needed to change.
Yeah, that's really a great point about all of these additional metrics that we can look at to look at the impact on the consumers. Elise, do you have any sort of tips on how organizations can help drive that objective-driven approach?
Yeah, I think we're going to talk today a lot about measurement frameworks and starting with objectives. I think that's key. If I take a different spin on this question, I think just investing in yourself and learning is the best start that you can do. So I congratulate everyone joining Measurement Month and tuning into these webinars, because I think that's really the first step you can do. And I think just network with people inside and outside your industry to keep learning, keep up to date, understanding what really matters and things we should avoid. I'm sure we'll talk about avoiding AVEs at some point as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And just, I would say, just encourage everyone to keep asking questions. Really understand your stakeholders and keep questioning. I mean, that's exactly what I did about 3 years ago when I went to the first AMEC Summit. I purposely sought out Richard, whether he liked it or not, and asked him many questions. And I think that's just the best way to learn. Take courses. I also did the AMEC postgraduate certificate, and you can just discover a lot. I mean, in that course itself, there was a really interesting module on internal communications. Look, that's not necessarily my day job, but I think it's a fantastic learning to understand how to engage your audiences internally and what channels they're using and how you can get your message across. So I learned that in the AMEC course. So I'd say, look, keep investing, learning. I mean, I'm on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out and connect. I'd love to learn from everyone in the audience as well. So that's a good first step to do.
Great, thank you, Elise. And what about you, Yene? So how do you, because you bring more of an agency perspective, so when you have clients come up to you, do you really straight off the bat to try and discuss the objectives rather than just jump straight to the end of the campaign and try and evaluate everything? How do you approach that?
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone from Lagos, Nigeria. So I can't say, I wish I'd say it's always been the case where we've been very intentional about setting objectives and then measuring across the entire project so that we can optimize on the go, but it's not always been the case. The case as always was, you get a project, you get a client, you get a campaign, you do the work, and then you send in a closeout report and everybody moves on, Yeah. But we realized about 7-8 years ago that we weren't getting the kind of respect from the clients that we wanted, and we couldn't bill what we felt we should be billing comparative to the kind of efforts we're putting in. So as part of the research to find out what we could do better, we realized actually that we can't even show value if we're not measuring the right things. That's how I found AMEC. That's when we started investing in tools and all of that. We've gotten to a place now where we've moved our client revenues up like over 5 years by over 1,000%. Because now we can demonstrate clearly the value of what we do vis-a-vis the business that they are doing, their stakeholder management and all of that, you know. And in doing that, it didn't happen overnight. We had to educate the clients, we had to work with them. Most clients were used to AV. It's the easiest thing for them to get budgets approved. It's the easiest thing for them to avoid all the hassles at the board level and all of that, you know. But today, what we do for about 95% of our clients is that we agree on objectives and we work with them, as Nick said, not only just to even measure what happens on third-party platforms, but actually on our own platforms, from Twitter to Facebook and LinkedIn and IG and all of that, you know. And I think from BHM's perspective, what we've seen is that the clients respect us more, the clients are more engaged, they are more involved, and therefore they are more willing to invest resources in public relations.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And Ola, how do you approach, because I know you really like when we onboard a new client, starting off with a measurement framework, because it helps us really go back to the objectives. So how do you traditionally do that?
Yeah, I think it can be so overwhelming sometimes trying to figure out, okay, where do we start? What do we measure? People, I find most of the time they're very on board with the principles behind it. The idea that, yes, we should measure something that's meaningful, but what is that? What is that number? How do we figure out what that is? So yeah, I think starting with a framework, and obviously there are amazing tools available from AMEC, their integrated evaluation framework. If anyone's not familiar, I would definitely recommend checking that out on AMEC's website. It's a free interactive tool, but you can also kind of adapt your own versions of it. And I think what's really important is that you think of it in terms of the audience journey. So who do you want to reach? What do you want to say to them? What do you want them to think? And what do you want them to do as a result? And then you start to map that against, okay, so these are the activities that I'm undertaking to reach those specific people. How do I measure that? And how do I see what the actual output of that is as well? So not just what's the coverage that I've got, but the next step of, well, what impact did this have on the audience? What do they think or feel or do differently as a result? And it is something that can sound very overwhelming at times, but when you kind of break it into its constituent parts like that and kind of make it really centered around that audience journey, what is it you're trying to get your audience to do? It becomes a lot simpler. And I think then it becomes a lot more strategic. It's a lot easier to demonstrate the impact that you're having for your organization. It's a lot easier to draw that sort of line between this number here and what are we actually trying to achieve as an organization? This number matters because it shows us how we're actually delivering on our goals.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lot more strategic, and also it provides you with the confidence that you are looking at the right thing. And we're not just stopping at the outputs, we're looking at all the way to the outcomes. And as Nick was saying with the consumers straight off the bat, we need to think about the end of the funnel. So yeah, that's a really good tip. I'd like to quickly go back to Yeni's point about credibility. I think that's a really important point that we need to discuss, particularly how we can use data to get a seat at the table. Because the credibility of reputation management is certainly something that's been debated over the past few years. But if we look at the recent events, the pandemic, the political and social events that have happened recently, it has certainly reinforced our role as communicators and reinforced the value of what we do. And senior leaders can see this, and other people outside the PR departments can understand the value of what we do a little bit better. So my question is really, and I'd like to start off with you, Elise, how do you provide some more tangible contributions of PR? How do you prove the value of PR?
No, it's a great question. I think I sort of asked myself as well, you know, you can ask yourself the question, okay, do you think you're good at your job? You might know measurement inside out. But if you can't communicate that with your stakeholders, then it's just not going to land. So I think you really have to understand, what does good look like from the shoes of your stakeholders. And so that can vary depending on the business. You know, if you work in a global organization, you know, it can become very complex, right? You have to understand sort of the headquarters and all of the people in the markets. But I think the first point is to really put yourself in the shoes of the stakeholders and understand what they want. Like, ask the questions, really listen, and then come forward. I think sometimes when you're a sort of an insight professional, or you're an expert in your trade, as I'm sure so many people on this call are, it's really easy to sort of go there and jump in with solutions, but just sort of to take a step back and really listen, I think. And I think the one question that really helps me is simply asking, how can I help? Because I think sometimes measurement is an afterthought, and especially in PR and comms. I mean, you know, my background, I started off in academia and teaching and marketing, then in consumer insights. And I think PR and communications is so unique that there's always something to work on, right? There's always something urgent. There's always something that needs to happen. And so just taking that deep breath with your stakeholders and just asking, how can I help? And I think the more that you listen and understand what they need, then the more you can propose. And I think, to Orla's point too, you know, when you do come up with solutions, work together, you know, with the measurement framework, starting from objectives, really asking, look, what are we trying to achieve here? So that's something that helps me, and I hope it helps others.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. Ayeni, from your point of view, do your clients, what sorts of requirements do your clients come up with when it comes to the actual demonstrations of their activities, their communications activities?
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to what Elisa said. Is first to listen. So oftentimes it sounds very simple, but it's very important to listen. Even when we measure, it's not just because we want the report to share with the client. Is to be able to see the trends and see the insights, and then determine what actions need to be taken based on what we've heard and seen. I think with our clients, oftentimes they just want to be able to demonstrate value, whether you are moving sentiments from neutral to positive, or from negative to positive, or you're trying to get consumers to take action or employees to take action. We work in Nigeria with Coca-Cola, with AMECMM, with MTN. These are companies that do a lot of consumer activities. MTN in Nigeria is the largest telco, in fact, the largest telco in Africa. They have over 60 million customers. I mean, people have to be connected to their network to do banking activities, education, healthcare, and all of that, you know. So they want to see that we're helping them communicate in such a way that they can prevent issues, or that they can manage issues before they become crises, or that we can communicate in such a way that, and in Nigeria, where you find that there is increasingly challenges with the quality of education. So you want to communicate in such a way that you cut through the clutter, not in an academic way, not in an intellectual way. So I find that when we set clear objectives, we can go back day on day, week on week, and month on month, and say, this is not working, this is working, can we pivot here, can we optimize here, and all of that. And I said earlier, most of the crises that we've avoided have been because we've been able to spot issues and try and work with the clients to sort of navigate them before they become crises. Or even when crisis is happening, we're able to sort of gauge where they may be resolved and then advise the client in that direction. So the clients want to be heard. The clients want to know that we understand them and that we know their problems. And once we get that trust and that alignment, it's easy to work with them to then begin to change how they measure PR, or how they sort of gauge the success of a particular activity.
Yeah, absolutely, completely agree. And ultimately, it's all about demonstrating tangible impact to against the objectives of the business. So if my objectives are speaking to the bottom line, then it is much more likely that what I'm doing will have an impact and senior leaders will more likely listen to me. So actually, that's something that is really important for us as communicators, to make sure that our objectives, that the communications objectives, are in line with the objectives of the organization. So I remember when we created the framework for Honda, we looked at what Honda was trying to achieve as a whole, as an organization, and then we looked at the communications objectives. So Nick, what was your experience of that when we had this exercise?
I think before I go into that and listening to what other people have said and thinking about what we started this section of the conversation around to try and get a seat at the table, I'm going to try and answer it in a slightly backward way. Is if I look at my senior vice president and I look at his diary, and I think about the fact that he's running 3 or perhaps 4 product divisions over 27 countries, and the time he has and the number of different topics that he's got to cover, the measurement of my activity is a relatively small part of his larger brief. So then you've got to decide as a practitioner what you really want to do. Do you just want to reassure him that what you're doing is okay, and maybe ABE is okay for that? But actually, if you want to try and grab his attention because you want incremental budget for future activities, you want to be given extra responsibility to deliver a certain campaign for the business, or to deliver against a certain measure, that's where the improvement in your metrics can really, really help. Because if you don't have those deeper metrics, you can't tell a very good story. And so when we started our framework, it really was with the aim of getting away from, okay, we've generated you a big amount of money, which we all know is a bit made up, shall we say. And it was very much as made up as any other metric in communications evaluation is. But at least what we have now moved towards is based on the true reality of what we're actually doing. So it's based upon who we're reaching and how ultimately those people that we reach change their behavior because of what we've done. So that was really an important part of what we wanted to do, to move beyond the simple, let me reassure you, SVP, that we're doing a good job. Yeah. I don't want to do that anymore. I actually want more money, and I want a more elaborate activity plan for my area. So it's what do you want to do, particularly for in-house people? Do you want quiet life, or do you want to do more? And that will drive the next route that you take with your evaluation.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when we create such big measurement programs, there's a lot of change that's involved. It's a huge cultural change, and it's about navigating that and making sure that we support people, and explain why this number is better than that number, and show the credibility of the measurement program. Sorry, Ola, were you about to jump in?
I was just going to jump in and say, that I think Nick's hit the nail on the head there when he said story. It's about the storytelling. You can't just kind of give all of the data to someone who's at a senior level and expect them to understand it. It's about the story that you tell with it. And I think that actually that's something that a lot of comms professionals somehow actually tend to shy away from, even though it's actually the thing that they are best in the world at. They're excellent storytellers. They engage with people, and that's their bread and butter. So I think making sure that you're really clear on what your story is with any of the data, what it is that you're wanting to tell, because there is no magic number that just shows that you're amazing or that you've done better than last month. And if there is, if you've got a number like that, it's probably a little bit lacking in credibility to a certain extent. So it's about the way that you structure it, the way that you tell that story about what those numbers mean, and speak in their language. Make sure that it's what they care about. It's the thing that keeps them up at night.
And just to add on the back of that, if you don't mind, Jennifer,
no.
is that I think it's important for us to also be interested in the client's businesses. We often know PR and comms very well, we can create good content, we can tell good stories, but it's equally important to understand the business that the client is in. What most executives, like what Nick said, want is that they want to see a clear demonstration that we can actually help them succeed. So whether the client is in telecommunications or in manufacturing, the more we understand their industry and their particular business, the more we can actually think the way they think, so we can anticipate issues and advise them. It's not every PR problem that can be solved by PR that solves a business problem. So when we advise, we're advising within the context of knowing how the CEO or the director is thinking. If we combine good storytelling, good measurement with actually having the right insight about the particular business, we find that then the clients begin to see us as advisors. And when we look at metrics, we begin to pick actually what is important, what communicates and achieves business objectives, but comms objectives, but that you can also tie that as a result of what we've done, this can also help us achieve business objectives. I find that our clients used to see PR as just a publicity tool. And now increasingly they are seeing PR as actually a strategic communications tool.
Yeah, I'd really liked your point, Yanni, about the metric. And once we understand the metrics a little bit better, then we understand what really matters to us. And I know Elise, as part of the PMI measurement program, you have done fantastic work trying to contextualize the numbers, trying to add meaning to the numbers. So could you tell us a little bit more about this?
Yeah, I think it comes down to understanding the audience. And we have many different audiences. We work from everyone from the senior management team, the CEO and the vice presidents, all the way down to middle management in the headquarters, and then all through the markets, over 100 markets, and that's at all different levels. So I think, it comes down to, I can't reiterate the listening and asking questions up front, but also understanding what your audience needs. Because some people, they really want to get into the nitty gritty. They want that dashboard. They want to get into that portal. They want the Excel exports. They will go into every line and every detail. So, the quality better be there, because there are people that like the nitty gritty, and others, they just want the top line details. And that also depends on where they are in the hierarchy. And I think we've talked about it today, there's not all the time in the world either. So I think sort of understanding your audiences and delivering what they need. I think that, like Orla mentioned before as well, it's easy to get overwhelmed with everything. There is so much you can measure, and we have, there's so many different teams, just with how the world is evolving. There's SEO, there's social, there's website analytics, there's paid, there's earned media, the list goes on. And for all of those, you have a whole team in place. So I think a big part of it too is connecting people actually across the company, connecting different teams, different stakeholders, understanding the objective as a whole. Because sometimes, colleagues might come to me with a question, but maybe I'm actually not the best one for that question. There's another team in place that might do that particular research. And it's how do you get all these different researchers to work together to give a holistic picture? Because I also think the top management doesn't need 20 different reports on the same objective, on different types of measurement. So how can you bring that all together? And I think, it's a journey. I heard that at the AMEC Summit 3 years ago when I attended, that, measurement is a journey. And I think it really is. And especially when it comes to PR and communications, I think there are a lot of sort of, old habits. Unfortunately, you sort of judge by the size of your clipping books or the AVEs. We've managed to move away from that. But I think there's a lot of sort of teaching and education that's also a big component of it as well.
Yeah, actually, this is a really good point, Elise. So how do you try and make sure that you bring all of the markets with you? So you've just said, we have to communicate to 100 markets and we have to measure their impact. So how do you measure internationally when there are so many different stakeholders, so many different beliefs and different types of understanding of what we are trying to do here? So how do you make sure that you manage your stakeholders?
Yeah. Well, I think first understand the audience, and then there are always quick wins you can do. Like I have Richard's guide on 22 reasons to say no to AVEs, and I think I distribute that bi-weekly, at least. It's on my desktop, and that often leads to some interesting calls with markets. So I send this, and it's often just about education. It's not that people are really opposed to it. It's just that's what they've been taught and that's what they know. So it's just about having that discussion, and then it leads to a deeper discussion of, okay, what are the objectives and what are we trying to achieve? So it's sort of moving the discussion away just from metrics and getting more into the, you know, measuring what matters discussion. And, you know, you can just type that into the website, the AMEC website, and you'll find the guide. So that's, I think, a quick win that it's just popped up in the chat.
Yeah,
I see that. And then I think it's about tailoring your message or your deliverables to different audiences. So the same report won't work across the different management. You know, the senior management board wants something very short and concise, 1 to 2 pages, top line. They go into that meeting and they can quickly say what they've achieved. Someone in the markets might want more granular details. They really, you know, want to see the region and then all of the different market breakdowns as well to be able to compare it against different markets. So I think it really depends on the audience, tailoring the deliverables. And I think it takes time. I think you have to have a lot of patience, because it does take time. But I find that, you know, people and colleagues are very open and they're very grateful once they're sort of educated and aware of how we can measure and how we can improve, because they know they can also head into their next performance review, right, and say, look, you know what, I can actually describe and show the impacts that I've given to the business. And I think a good question that I constantly ask myself, because it is a journey and I am failing along the way and learning from those failures, but really sort of asking with each sort of activation that we do, like, what's the value and impact of that piece of work? What value and impact did it have? Like, and if it just ended up in the recycling bin, nowhere else, then you've got more work to do. So I think just constantly asking yourself, how can I improve? What could I have done better? You know, these sort of questions also help in this sort of area. Yeah,
absolutely. I love the honesty there. Measurement is a journey, failure is part of it, it's part of the fun. So love the honesty there. What about you, Ayeni? Because obviously you're based in Nigeria, but you have a lot of exposure to different markets and different types of thinking. So what would be your advice in measuring internationally and managing stakeholders like this?
Actually, I think AMEC has done a fairly good job of helping us standardize, because the framework that Ola spoke about earlier, that everyone can adapt and use how they like, that's what we use. We work for clients, you know, across Africa. We have some clients from the US and all of that. You know, what we just try to accomplish is, what is the single slide that if anybody sees it, they can see what we're trying to achieve and what our inputs and all of that were, what the outtakes are, what the outputs are, and what the outcome is. You can continue to drill in into PowerPoint and Excel eventually, but I think it is actually global in terms of how to measure, did we succeed? Whether it's to launch a product, or is to manage a crisis, or is to just make an announcement. So what we do in the UK and in Nigeria is to just make sure that we can align on that single slide before we move forward. And as I said earlier, to be able to provide an update to clients on a regular basis, where if something was not working, you could then optimize. So I'll give you an example. We send out, we do daily reports, weekly reports, quarterly reports, and biannual reports. And the reports that goes to senior management is, they just want to see a slide or two, because they are going to a board meeting, they want to take a decision and all of that. But the reports that go to, say, a mid-level manager or someone that is at L2 has to be as detailed as possible, because their own bosses might have questions that they have to answer. And you know, so I think AMEC has done a great job. My hope is for us to get to a place somewhere where even the clients can have a dashboard, same dashboard as the agencies, where you can just log in like a CRM tool. My dream is that there is something customized for PR in such a way that everybody can have access, whether you're in Egypt or you're in China, you can see what's going on, you can contribute, and then we can all make amends and make changes real time. And we're building something that is going to do that hopefully soon.
Oh, great. Fantastic. We're excited for you. And what about you, Nick? Because when we changed the main metrics and when we tried to create this new measurement program, there was obviously an initiative that was coming from the central office, but then how did you generate buy-in with the different regional European branches?
I think in that instance, yeah, it was a centrally focused activity, but we did bring in our country managers right at the beginning of the shift in the process. So very much at the tender stage. So when we were looking for a new supplier, we had our country managers there. And then since then, it's been about, I think there's an innate understanding and appreciation that the profession has to move on from its legacy metrics. That everybody understands that, but then it's about overcoming that problem of, well, yeah, but my boss is asking me for AVE, so I'll continue. But by creating something in terms of an output metric for us that kind of replaces AVE, but is much more based on reality, that kind of suffices that upwards pressure that we're getting from kind of senior members in the branch. But then we can kind of drill down into it to say, well, yeah, your senior manager is now convinced and happy of the contribution that you're making to the business, but you need to know how to get better, because we're going to be doing this again and again and again and again and again. So you need to know the next layer of data down, and that's what we've been working with the markets on, to understand, okay, what impact does it have if you run this event versus that event, having a spokesperson, not having a spokesperson, investing in specific content versus not investing in specific content. Those are the kind of conversations we can now have with them, which makes the development of their local campaigns much better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this shows again the importance of being able to be a little bit more granular with the data. If we want to get into the weeds of the data, we can do so. Now I'd like to quickly touch on integrated measurement. So we've sort of alluded to it, I think all of us pretty much, when we talked about different metrics and different external sources of data that we can look at to try and enhance our measurement programs and try and be a little bit more holistic with the way that we view things. So what are the sorts of external data sources that you like to use? So let's start off with you, Elise. You talked about SEO, and so tell us more about this.
Yeah, I think there's a ton. There's a ton actually, and I think the problem is not data. I think we've got too much data. I think everyone and their dog has a dashboard. I think that's a real issue across different organizations. And I don't think anyone wants to be logging into 20 different dashboards every day. I don't think that's fun for everyone. So I think it's really, understanding the landscape and understanding, who does what and how, understanding the key KPIs, the key metrics that can feed into it. And again, it always goes back to the objectives and what you're trying to achieve. And I think, we've touched on that. Nick touched on it before, like there's a problem where you try to pack everything into a presentation, and then I think you can just overwhelm the audiences, and then you don't get any takeaways. So just really understanding, what are the key things, the absolute key things that I need to do. And, it can really be a handful of things. It doesn't have to be pages of things. And I think that's really critical. I think just personally, myself too, it's also just understanding when, good is enough. Don't strive for perfection, because you can be editing those reports for days. So understanding when good is enough. And I think, you know, a lot of these folks are communication and PR professionals. I mean, they're fantastic communicators. So I think sort of, you know, investing as much as in your communication as you are in the measurement frameworks to really get the message to land. You know, one technique that I think works particularly well is sort of this good, better, best, because a lot of the time, you know, you sort of, the teams might say, okay, I need reach, I need volumes, you know, and we sort of lean towards these vanity metrics and say, okay, you know, that's good. Here's a better approach. We could also integrate this, and here's the best approach that I'd suggest. So I think also giving people options, it works well as well. And to give that option, and then over time, you know, I think I just keep using that word journey. I think you just sort of try to achieve small wins and celebrate them. I would say celebrate them over time. You know, when we got rid of AVEs, like, we celebrated it because it's an achievement. So just celebrate the small wins and just understand, look, it's going to take time, but I think, look, less is more. That's the message I'd iterate.
Yeah, completely agree. Less is more, because there's so much data, as you've just said, out there. So actually, Ola, quick question to you. Does it actually always make sense to integrate all of these additional data sources?
Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And I think that, you know, it's exactly to what Elise has just said, that we need to make sure we're not trying to boil the ocean, to steal a phrase from Richard Bagnall. That it's often very tempting to want to try and do everything all at once and link everything together. Sometimes you need to kind of pick the thing that is actually going to be impactful, start small, and then grow it from there. So it's not necessarily about being able to link everything right through to, you know, kind of sales and go to the absolute end kind of that funnel. It's sometimes finding what are the proxies along the way, what are the things that make sense. And not every campaign is integrated anyway. You know, some campaigns might be very much led on a paid basis with only a little bit of PR, and it doesn't make sense to try and put those two sets of data together, or vice versa. You can have something that's very PR driven, and if we're trying to add in kind of all of that paid or owned data, it's not necessarily making sense. So everything, as with everything, context is king, really. It's where it makes sense, use it, but start small and grow from there.
And don't try and boil the ocean, as Richard said. All right, thank you, Ola. So in the interest of time now, I'd like to, I know time flies, so I'd like to perhaps wrap up really quickly with some thoughts, final thoughts on some of the things that we discussed. So in 30 seconds, can I ask you guys, what would be your key takeaways from these discussions? How do you embed a culture of measurement? Let's start off with you, Jenny.
I think my key takeaway is that it's very impressive that we're here today, and almost everyone that has spoken on the panel and in the comments confirmed that they've moved from AVE. This was not the case 4, 5, 6 years ago. I think it's been an incredible journey, and it's good that we're moving clients away, and we're moving away and we're doing better. I think the education should continue, and then we need to be able to get to a place where there is a general awareness in our agency side about how measurement not only helps help us get better budgets or show better value of our work, but it actually moves the entire industry forward. So I'm very pleased with what I've heard. I've learned a lot from this session, and I just wish that it will continue to get better.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ayene. What about you, Nick? 30 seconds.
30 seconds, okay. How do we do it? Commitment to it. So ensuring that you are completely committed to making the change, and that you don't waver in your commitment to that, to the activity. And also consistency, I think, is important. So,
yeah,
you know, continuing to improve the quality of what you do in terms of measurement will by itself breed reassurance, and ultimately people will start to come and ask you for that data. So I think commitment and consistency. Hopefully that was 30 seconds.
Yeah, fantastic. Elise, what about you?
So my 3 key takeaways, I'd say keep it simple, don't overcomplicate it, avoid jargon, measure what matters, utilize the frameworks and resources available at AMEC. The second, engage through storytelling. Don't be another printout that ends up in the recycling bin. And the third one I would say is ask, how can I help? And truly actively listen to your stakeholders.
Great. And what about you, Ola? Final thoughts?
Yeah, very similar. I would say make sure you're clear on what you're trying to achieve. Make sure that you are bringing all of your stakeholders with you. It needs to be a top-down and a bottom-up approach that can meet in the middle. And remember that you're storytellers, so tell the story with the data. Make it meaningful, make it impactful.
Fantastic. That was even shorter. So thank you so much to the panelists. So we'll now take questions from the audience, sorry. So I can see there's a lot of messages agreeing with most of your points. There is a question about AVEs. So I can say, what is your next PR measurement? You've gone past AVEs. So actually, question about AVE, how do you, what would be the reason for you to move away from AVEs if there isn't pressure from your senior stakeholders to do so, in terms of AVEs particularly? So how would you tackle this issue?
Can I take that one first?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think in this instance, you may not be getting pressure from above in terms of, I want you to move away from AVEs, because to be honest, senior stakeholders might not even know what AVEs are. But what they will be asking you to do is become efficient, more effective, more impactful. So how do you do that if you don't know where you're going and what you're doing? And that's what the data does for you. So fundamentally, without the data, you can't get more efficient, effective, or impactful. So that's really important. And a really important reason to have your measurement framework in place.
Great. We've just got another question, moment for us to shine. So what is your proudest moment as a PR insights professional? I'm sure you'll think of many examples, but could you give us one particular example? Anybody wants to go first?
I'll jump in. I think for me, it's always whenever you kind of get from the theoretical into the reality and it's starting to work. So we tend to have a lot of quite theoretical conversations about what we want to do and creating frameworks, talking about objectives and numbers. But it's when that actually comes into fruition and people see the results and they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. I understand this information so much more than the AVE or whatever it was that I had before. I can see what's working, what's not. So I think for me, it's always going from that sort of theoretical, hypothetical into reality.
Yeah, that's such a good example, Ola, when the audience has got a bit of an epiphany and realizes that actually, oh, that number is a lot more relatable. So that's a great example. Anything else before I move on to the next question? Great. We talk about proving the value of PR a lot, but what is actually the value of PR? This is more of a PR general question, but what do you think the value of PR is and should be?
I can attempt that.
Yeah.
Can I go for that? So I think it's such a significant question, because if we answer that question very well and we communicate it in such a way that the world understands it, it will solve a lot of problems. And I think that value is purpose. Yes, is on purpose. It ties to everything, to integrity, to honesty, to credibility, to how companies behave, how governments behave, and all of that. If we take a strategic look at PR, we begin to then see how we can help businesses do better, help governments behave better, help people actually understand what is important, and all of that. I wrote a think piece a few months ago trying to connect the kind of damage that big tech and businesses and governments have been doing to the fact that PR guys don't yet have the kind of seat at the table that we need. Think of thought leadership. Most of the thought leadership that we have around take sustainability or the issues that matters to our clients or to governments and all of that, they are not being driven by PR people, by communicators. So I think that the more we improve in our practice and the more we can communicate the essence of PR in a way that a business owner, a CEO, a governor, a president can see how it ties to their success and citizens understand it, I think we can then tie that purpose to like making the world get better. What I find now is that journalists troll PR people on Twitter. It seems that there's a clear deficit of understanding in what PR is meant to do. And when you bring it to measurement, the reason why we want to measure what matters, why we want to show value, why we want more credibility is that we want to show that actually the result, the outcome of this activity is not just this media clipping, it's not just this mention, it's not just this link, it must tie to a certain outcome. If we're able to do that, we would not have helped just ourselves as professionals or the industry. I think we would have helped businesses and governments and countries around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. So PR is so much more than just media relations. We've got another question probably coming from a marketing person. Marketing colleagues have been great at measurement for many years. PR is arguably lagging behind. What would you say is the most underutilized source or metric that PR pros should use?
I would contest that fact. I would contest the fact that marketing colleagues have been great at measurement for many years.
I'd say consumer insight colleagues, keeping the marketing ones,
Yeah, I agree.
I think from my point of view with that, what we've done with our measurement program more recently, by being able to get closer to outcomes, by being able to physically show actually the kind of impact that particularly in our business where we have a distinct pre-launch and launch and post-launch kind of cadence, the amount of impact that PR and our team can have on the pre-launch phase is much higher than we would have known before we started measuring it. So we can now use that data to highlight actually our particular role in a launch campaign is to drive that pre-launch interest. And we wouldn't have had that before. But yeah, I think I don't know. I think we tend to feel a little bit sorry for ourselves saying, oh, look at marketing. They've got hundreds of thousands of pieces of data and they're fantastic and their budgets are enormous. Yeah, but actually, I find, and maybe it's Honda as an outlier, the value placed in corporate communications in my business is at least on a level, if maybe even higher than our marketing colleagues, because whilst it's great that they have so much data, they fall into the trap of having too much data, and then how do they tell the story? So that's kind of my maybe contested argument on the fact that our marketing colleagues have it easy. I don't think they do.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think sometimes they're a little bit better at their PR around their measurements.
Just got more money.
Yeah, and I think it's a lot of the data that they use, actually, it's a bit cloak and dagger sometimes, or a little bit kind of smoke and mirrors, rather, is the better way to put it. There are so many issues with digital data in terms of cookies, blocking things, bots, driving spam traffic, that actually you do need to take a lot of those numbers with a pinch of salt as well. And I don't think that there is one particular silver bullet metric that PR pros can use. And I think that's the point. We need to get away from that thinking and always build it based on your own objectives. But something that I think is a really interesting tool to use is search data. It's something that is freely available in a lot of instances. Google search trends is something that you don't have to pay anything for. There are lots of other great tools as well, like Answer the Public and so on, that really help you to understand what are people saying, what do they think, and if you can correlate that with your activity, then you're able to start making some really interesting stories about the outcome of the work that you're doing, without it necessarily needing to be, for instance, a really expensive piece of market research.
Yeah, absolutely. Elise?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that because I think it's such a fantastic point. If you sort of look at the trends, I think across organizations and different workplaces, I think it's more about connecting the different data. So I think exactly, there's not one single metric, I think, that we need to use. But I think, you know, there's pros and cons in every department. So we sort of have to work together, collaborate, and sort of build the story. I think I can't emphasize enough the storytelling, and just connecting all of the data. And I think it's a great point about the Google search as well, because I think even when you build the measurement frameworks and a lot of the impact, you know, you naturally find a lot of sort of the opinion research and the consumer research that falls into that bucket, because it may be about changing perceptions and opinions. But, you know, just type into Google, "my boss is," and you'll get some insights on that as to what people are really Googling there. So I think there's a lot that can be done across different sort of research methods and techniques. And I think it's really combining the different disciplines. I think that's where there's a missed gap, I think, and an opportunity in the future.
Yeah, definitely more opportunities for us. Thank you so much, Elise. We're ending on a powerful note for sure. Unfortunately, we'll have to wrap up today's session. It was fantastic speaking to you all. We've talked about purpose, we've talked about commitment, consistency, frameworks, the importance of setting up objectives before we start the campaign. We talked about the importance of education, keeping things simple, less is more, don't boil the ocean. We talked about storytelling. So thank you so much for all of your great tips. And we wish you all a fabulous rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone. Take care. Bye.